So I wanted to show off my Wild Strike build here, the build that I've been playing over the past few days. What I did was I decided that I would combine Wild Strike, which is a pretty cool looking ability. I really like the appearance of it, and you know, while I'm definitely a min-maxy type of character, I'll take a skill that is flashy and fun to look at any day over one that's just kind of bland and effective. You can see it's a pretty cool skill. It kind of throws projectiles and areas and chaining effects just kind of all over the place. And I've got multi-strike on there right now. Even multi-strike, like every strike procs a different attack. So an interesting thing to do with this is to use it with elemental equilibrium. You hit him the first time for fire damage, the second time for cold damage, and you deal a bunch of extra damage because you lowered the resist process. It seems pretty neat. So what you'll also notice is that I'm not using any auras right at the moment. And this is because I thought, as long as I'm not using any offensive auras like, hatred like Herald of Ash, defensive auras are only so good for me. I have about 11,000 evasion. I could probably get 4,000 or 5,000 more, which would make my evasion, it would give me more evasion. I could also run with Arctic armor, which would give me a little bit more mitigation, but nothing really screamed, I need to have this.
Idea of a system then.
So I've got this big mana pool, and I don't know what to do with it. And what just happens to be right next to elemental equilibrium, but mind over matter. Pretty neat. So I have 720 mana on this character, and Mind Spiral. So effectively these two act together as though I had a life pool of something like 5,500 life. Because 70% of the damage goes here, 20% of damage goes here until it's empty. And what you'll see in the clear speed videos is that the mana pool fills up very, very quickly from the combination of Gemini Claw and Poacher's Mark. 12 mana gain on hit combined with 14 mana gain on hit for 26 mana gain every time you hit something. So this is an evasion-based character. I don't really have any armor. I don't really have any energy shield. My block is not so good, 23%. I could have a ton more block, but then I would be playing a different character. This is really more of an evasion-based character. Although, if it were easier for me to get block cap while getting EE and the claw stuff and still having a reasonable amount of life, that's probably the build I would like to go with more. There's some cool things you can do with max block that you can't really, things like, running Riposte Reckoning Vengeance on a power charge on crit. If you're block, you can proc this all the time. You can proc power charge on crit all the time, and you don't need to have it in your links like I do. Because again, this character is not a block character, it's a dodge character. It only has block because I want to use a shield. And I wanted to use a shield because of the shield defense nodes. I'm a little bit off topic. That's kind of my defensive plan, but while I'm there, why don't I stay here? So my defensive plan is having a ton of evasion, a ton of dodge, and then use Mind Over Matter and Fortify attached to faster attacks and whirling blades to reduce the damage of that I take. I get reduced damage from Fortify and 30% reduction from Mind Over Matter, which is pretty strong in terms of mitigating hits. It's not as strong as something like Lightning Coil, plus armor, plus, block, plus God knows what else. But in this build you can't use Lightning Coil, and unfortunately you also can't use Hiri's Ire, because Elemental Equilibrium will turn the static damage mod on Hiri's Ire and Lightning Coil into another element that you have to deal with the resistances from. So that's more or less my defensive plan. A little bit of block, a lot of dodge, a lot of evasion, and Mind Over Matter and Fortify for reducing incoming damage. Let's talk about my offensive plan a little bit. I've already kind of talked about I like using Elemental Equilibrium. I like using Wild Strike with a Claw for the life gain on hit, the mana gain on hit. That way I don't have to spend points on things like Spirit Void or a mana leech slot in my links. I definitely don't want to do that. But Gemini Claws are nice in that they give you about 14 mana gain per hit when you use them. This point there's a reasonable amount of mana leech that you can get just by virtue of the fact that you're using a claw. But unfortunately Wild Strike converts 60% of its physical damage to elemental, and I use things like WED to scale up the elemental without also scaling the physical. This makes it very difficult to rely on mana leech to get your mana back. So I figured, as long as that's hard, why not use a helmet like Mind Spiral that makes it so that you just can't do it. And it's, it works out fine because your mana cost is 44 and you get 26 mana back whenever you hit anything. So as long as in your multi-strike, with all of your projectiles and chaining stuff going all over the place, as long as you hit twice, you're, not losing mana. And chances are you're going to hit a ton more than twice, which I think you'll see keeps your mana pool pretty full all of the time. Some other pieces I've chosen, Duressos, mainly because it doesn't have a static damage mod. It does have a fairly powerful mitigation piece in both the endurance charges and the chance to dodge attacks. Just some kind of cool jewelry. Nothing, I don't think any of these are GG jewelry pieces. Doriani's Invitation, kind of a cool build. A pretty solid evasion shield with life and a few resists on it. And then Mind Spiral at Series Step. And some pretty good gloves. And that's about it. So you might see, if you take if you dig into the tree a little bit, that my increased damage for claws and one-handed weapons, etc., is not all that high. This is why I'm using Rallying Cry. When you only have about 200 or 230% increased damage, that 15% damage that you get right off the bat, and then when you add to it, it's effectively 1.68 increased damage per enemy that is around when you rally and cry. That like 20-25% damage is kind of a big deal. I mentioned I use Poacher's Mark. I also don't have that high of an accuracy, so the less evasion is a big deal for me. More flask charges is great. When I play this character again, I plan on playing it with 3 life flasks, or maybe even a 4th life flask, but definitely replacing this with a mana flask, because there are some times where you want to be able to just pop your mana up just a little bit during a fight. Whirling Blades, no one uses claws without Whirling Blades. It's an awesome skill. You move really, really, really fast with it. So, Smoke Mine, this is really a experimental piece of this build. Frenzy, I stuck that on there as this, in case I find myself wanting to sustain frenzy charges. I don't really use it. Really, I just rally and cry, curse the enemies, and then go to town with Wild Strike in most cases, using Smoke Mine sometimes when I'm like opening a dangerous box or fighting a boss that I can't deal with. I've got Volgrace, 32 additional % chance to dodge attacks and spells. You can see that that brings me up to the dodge cap for both attacks and spells. So that's pretty neat. I only use that again on enemies that I think would kill me if I didn't do that. I don't use it whenever it's up, though maybe I should, who knows. So yeah, that's the basic setup. For gems, I have Power Charge and create faster attacks, Wild Strike, Weapon Elemental Damage, and Multi-Strike. It's worth noting that the reason I don't have things like melee physical damage is because Wild Strike is a little bit odd in how it interacts, because the melee physical damage, and in fact Abyssus, which is what I wanted to use initially, scales the melee hit, but it does not scale the secondary hit, which is either an explosion or a chaining bolt or a projectile of ice. If you use melee whatever, it only scales the single target damage, not the multi-target damage, which is why I've got some kind of weird things in here. And if I had a 6th length, I would probably want critical damage as the 4th one, because, or as the 6th one, because all of these work on Wild Strike secondary damage, as near as I can tell, on scaling it. That's also true in the tree, which is a reason why these shadow nodes would be good to have if I had more space in my build. But for instance, these Marauder nodes would not be so good, because they'd be great for the single target physical damage, but that's not what really makes Wild Strike go. Yeah. This build uses a number of new things. It uses Wild Strike, it uses a Gemini claw as the claw. It uses Mind Spiral, which isn't new this patch, but it's something that I don't think people really used prior to, well, at least I never saw a build that made good use of it prior to this patch, so pretty neat. Another thing you can do if you're not a big fan of the Mind Spiral, you can use Crown of Eyes, and for one of your jewel sockets you can use Clear Mind for 60% additional increased damage. It's a pretty big bump, but for the jewelry that I'm wearing, it was a bigger deal to make up the attributes I would need for the more int on wearing Crown of Eyes and the fire resist you'd need than it was to just use DPS jewelry. So that is what I'm doing. Now, I say that is what I'm doing, but I'm lying to you, because this build is pretty much as close as you can come to ripping in standard for me right now, because I just went to Yellow Exalt my claw, which is a very nice claw. It had the 167 increased physical damage and the critical chance and multiplier before I started yellowing it tonight. And I got a static cold damage mod, which means that it's not good with elemental equilibrium. Kind of messes up your shtick. So, I'm probably gonna hold off on this guy until I can find a more suitable claw, or maybe rebuild this character into a more suitable build, but without mind over matter and elemental equilibrium. My suspicion is that this character would just be better played as a static striker. I already have a static striker. He's really hardy, he's really effective, but I wanted this character to be different. So, this is getting tabled for me for right now, but I thought I would share it to you share it with you in case gave you any inspiration for something you want to build yourself. Possible alterations, like I said, if there were a good way to make a block variant of this character, it would definitely be a lot stronger. It's easier to cap your block than it is to cap your dodge without Fall Grace up. This Volpack node, looking back at it, is probably not really something that I need a whole lot. I get a number of different places where I leech life, and that's fine, that's neat. Tooltip damage is not very high, but don't worry about that. What was I gonna... Oh, right, the amount of physical damage that I leech. It's not all that much. So, leeching it instantly isn't as big of a deal as you would think, because again, a lot of your damage ends up being elemental damage. I mentioned tooltip TPS. My tooltip TPS doesn't go above about 16.5k. There's a number of things going on there. The first of which is that it doesn't include the fact that it's going to convert 60% of your physical damage to an element. So it shows me dealing an average of about 730 physical damage, but that's not going to be what actually happens. What actually happens is about 60% of that, or about 438, is going to be converted to an element and then scaled up through WED and whatever random elemental damage mods that I have on here. Yeah, so, and then elemental equilibrium is also going to be a big damage bump. At the very least, it is 25% more damage than without, which is slightly less than Hatred if I were to run Hatred on this character. But the combination of elemental equilibrium and using the mana pool, using all of the mana pool for mind over matter, feels pretty slick. It feels pretty solid, which is why it's unfortunate that I have to shelf this character, because I shot myself in the foot with an Exalt Orb. Fun times. So anyway, that's the build. Hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions about it or Wild Strike, or I mean even evasion builds in general. Feel free to, I plan on posting this on the forums and on YouTube. Feel free to contact me either of those places. Maybe I'll make a post on Reddit, because people seem to be pretty down on Wild Strike and pretty down on evasion, so this would be a fun little eye-opening thing to post. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time.